So much for being on this call today. I'm excited to interview you as someone who has actually been a part of nonprofit organizations and has fundraised, especially during this time of year-end giving. So first, can you explain what your organization is and what you do within the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here. So I work for a nonprofit called Casa Chirilagua. So we work and live in a migrant community, a Central American immigrant neighborhood called Chirilagua in Alexandria, Virginia. And essentially a very relationship oriented approach to the work that we do. But through our relationships over the last 15 years, we've developed after school programs, um, elementary, middle, high school, after school programs, mentoring programs, Bible studies, things like that. But really, the main focus is that we are completely community led. And so, in a lot of different ways, we have like a parent PTA, a parent board, and so what I often tell people is that we do good work, but we do it very slowly because the idea is that if we do it slower, we can include the community in it and we can make sure that every single decision we're making is not just for the community, but of the community. And that's a lot of our approach to the work. I specifically, I live in the neighborhood, but I'm also on staff and I'm our development director. And so I'm the development team, just me. And so it's been definitely a big learning curve of needing to do everything from major donor stewardship to grant writing to campaigns like end of year. We also have a very big campaign in the middle of the year as well, and from running events. So there have been a lot of things that I came in that I was like, yeah, no, I think I can do this, and a lot of things that I just kind of had to learn as I went. But it's definitely been a journey.
Yeah. So as a team of one, when you think of year-end giving, is there a little pressure that you feel when it comes to fundraising during that time?
Definitely pressure in some ways, and then also in others, no. I think where the pressure is that year-end giving can be very intimidating, mostly just because you have your budget, you're trying to reach it, and this is kind of like your last chance. And so it can be very intimidating. And what I've learned too is that um how I've kind of eased that fear over the years is I've realized that if you're just kind of looking at your budget month to month, it doesn't look like it almost always looks like you're not going to make it.
Yeah.
But giving always increases at the end of the year, and it's always like three times the amount that it was before. I mean, always might be a strong word, but that's what I've seen is that very often it's going to increase. And so even if it looks like, whoa, you're way below budget, we've often been able to clear those marks just because just within the culture of the United States, there's just a culture of, giving towards the end of the year. And we have like Giving Tuesday that's close to the year end time. And then also just in December, that's when, especially just because of taxes and things, that's when a lot of people are giving. So, yes, I feel the pressure often, but usually by the time I get into the flow of it, it seems to be working pretty well. And also, I entered into an organization that already kind of had a history of year end giving, so I didn't have to create all of it from scratch, which was helpful.
Nice. When do you actually start planning for year-end giving?
I usually, so like 2 weeks ago is usually when I start to kind of like have my preliminary thinking. So so usually October is when I start to think through year-end giving, but no need to worry if you haven't. It's kind of like year-end giving will be planned with as much time as you give it. It'll just that's just how much time you need to give it. And so I usually like to think of kind of the last the last quarter of the year, so like October, November, December, as the year end period. And what I mean by that is that I might not actually be doing the like campaign itself till like November or mid-November. So for example, with our nonprofit, we send out a year-end mailer at the end of the year. That's just the simple thing that we do. It's really successful. And we usually have a really compelling story that we send out to donors, and we send out to our entire donor base, and we'll get a lot of people giving online, or we also get a lot of checks and things like that. But usually that like doesn't actually get sent out till like the end of November. But when I say I'm thinking about October, I'm usually looking through all of our donors that I want to make sure I give a like a relational touch point to before they get that mailer. Because in my mind, if they get a mailer, I want it to feel connected to relationship. I don't want it to just be out of nowhere. And so, especially for those that we would like consider major donors, if I haven't connected with them in like 6 or 7 months, I'll probably start giving them a phone call in October just to give them a little update about what's going on and just let them know that end of year is coming up. They're probably going to get a mailer and we'd really appreciate their support and things like that. And so in October, I'm kind of making the overarch, I'm looking at my entire donor data, my donor base. I'm looking at who needs maybe a little bit more direct engagement, who doesn't. And then I'm also kind of looking at some like, okay, so we're going to send out this mailer. What are some ways that I can supplement the mailer with other strategies? Some have been very successful, some have been horribly unsuccessful, and I'm happy to talk about either of those. So,
Yes.
yeah.
I love that emphasis on relationships, especially with Casa being so ingrained in the community. Why is
Mhm.
that important that you emphasize relationships when it comes to donations and fundraising?
I could answer that a number of ways. One, I think just personally, I find it to be the most rewarding way to do fundraising. I know I'm a bit more of an extrovert, and it kind of fits my personality, but I also just think it might feel a little overwhelming. Maybe if you aren't an extrovert, or maybe if it's not natural, it might feel a little overwhelming on the onset to think like, oh my gosh, I have to steward all these relationships. But once you do relationship based fundraising is really like actually the most effective approach, because what you're doing is a relationship is actually really strong, and events and like grants and all this other stuff are actually very fickle. Like they can change from year to year, the interest can change, but there's something about a relationship and a bond to the organization that if I'm having a crazy season and I haven't connected with a donor in 8 or 9 months, but I have like a 3 or 4 year long relationship, I'm not stressed about that because I know that like that relationship uh, can weather hard times in the organization, right? So relationships, I think, are really the key to like long-term longevity in your fundraising. And honestly, like I think end of year campaigns in particular are a really unique opportunity to, I think if you're just viewing it in terms of raising money, you're missing a really key point here, because end of year fundraising is a massive relational touch point. And even if you don't get in all the funds you were expecting, like you're still building out the framework and the scaffolding and the relationships for future end of year campaigns, for future touch points, for future coffee dates, whatever it is. And you've now shared a really compelling story. Well, in our case, we've now shared a really compelling story that now, even if people didn't give, as I'm connecting with people from January through April of next year, they remember that story and they ask me questions about it and we talk about it. So it goes beyond just the funds. And um and then what I'd say too is, as I've done a lot of research around where like best practices of development and fundraising are moving, like what a lot of the experts are saying, is many people are saying that moving towards like relationship based models is actually the most bang for your buck idea. Like you can actually do a lot less work and get a lot more money, because there's something about a coffee date sharing a powerful story with someone. And like I just think the amount of work I've had to do on grant writing, and I have to just like fill out all this stuff and like really think through it takes like hours and hours and hours of my time just to get maybe like a $10,000 grant that like I have a 20% chance of getting anyways. And but if someone's like interested in talking with me and I have like a coffee date with them and I share a compelling story, that's led to like $20,000 gifts right off the bat. And that was like, you still want to put in your due diligence. You still want to like make the effort. You still want to like plan for the meeting, and you want to make sure you record, what you talked about and things like that. There's still work to do, but there's significantly less work to do in the long run when you're just building relational contacts. So actually, a lot of people in uh, a lot of the experts in the field are kind of steering people away. What I've noticed is I'm just seeing a trend is it feels like people are steering people away from like event-based fundraising, which was very popular in the like 90s and the 2000s, was like a very like, if we just do a golf event, we can just raise our whole budget. And a lot of people are seeing that like that's actually like a lot of money you have to put in
Mhm.
and for like not as much output. You don't actually have to put in a ton of money to bring a donor to a coffee day. You should just spot their coffee, and half the time they're going to offer it anyway. So it's like you don't actually have to put in as much money and effort for actually a greater outcome. And so, one, I just think relationships, I think it's a beautiful model because it connects people deeper to the work in a more like beautiful way, but it's also just more efficient in the long run.
Yeah. And
So,
I love that you brought up like sharing a story, because I think
mhm.
when I think about like the introvert in me, there's some people who may overthink, like, what does it look like to personalize? When I call you, like, do I ask you about your kids? Like, but I love that you you brought up telling a story.
Mhm.
And can you tell us like what kind of stories are you telling? Why are they so compelling, and why do they make people want to give?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, year-end giving specifically just needs to completely revolve around the story. If you're selling numbers, if you're, telling people, because numbers have their place, but in my mind, they should always be in the context of a story, or they should like kind of be an add-on to a story. But if we're just going out and we're telling people how many kids were in our kids club program, what our graduation rates were, what that does is that might, for someone who's already kind of bought into our organization, that might be a helpful like, oh, that's cool, like we achieved what we wanted to see. But for the far like majority of our donors who are either like they've given because they care, but they're not like super bought in, or they don't actually, a lot of our donors don't, have, I think what we don't realize is they have very limited understanding of what we do. They're supporting off of a very limited understanding. They don't have the complex understandings of what the day to day is and exactly how we do and what we do. And they're still giving, right? And so, what a story does that nothing else does is it like compels and it kind of woos, it wins people over, it's an emotional connection, right? And so what it has the power of doing, that like just kind of giving your statistics alone, I'm not against statistics, but giving them alone, or just kind of giving a general update about where we're going alone, that's not that that might be interesting, but it's not compelling, right? And so what we really try to do as a nonprofit is we're very about like um elevating and preserving and calling out the dignity of the neighbors and the people we work with. And so what we often try to do is we try to push back against what I think a lot of more like bigger organizations do, is they kind of go for like they're going at an emotion, they're trying to get it like a negative emotion. They're trying to be like, look how hard this is for somebody. Look how sad this person's life is. Like, won't you give out of that emotion? But if you actually look at it, again, I'm speaking more out of just like what's efficient, but I also like have some of my own like moral quandaries with that. But if we're just looking at like what's efficient, the reason why larger, like big, like national organizations go for that negative story is because they don't really need to build long-term relationships. They
Mhm.
have tons of money coming in. And so when they go for that story, they're just looking for that one-time gift. They just want someone to see the commercial of a sad person somewhere and then give some money. And then if they never think about them again, that's kind of okay for their strategy. But that negative reaction doesn't actually, um, people don't really actually want to stay in that feeling. So like they might give once, but it's not gonna build the relationship over time. So if you really do look at what you're doing and you have like a success story and a positive story, if your organization works with people, I don't know, like I'll just give a, like, we work with migrant families, so we tell stories about like um, the people in our programs and the things that they're achieving, and the, like our Costa College program, and how so many of their students are the first in their family to go to college, and we like highlight one of them, and we kind of show that they've been in our program since second grade, and this is what they've seen, and then all of a sudden it's, wait, like, I don't know, like Maria is about to graduate college. I want to partner with her. I don't want to just like help her. I want to partner with her. Like, she's the one doing the work and I get to come alongside her. There's actually like an emotional feeling in donors of being able to partner with, that actually like creates longer term relationship, and you're going to actually get more repeat giving if you are in the practice of, yes, sharing your needs, but sharing your needs always in the context of like these positive uplifting stories. And so
Yeah,
that's what we try to do.
I love that. I love that, the partner with us, because
Hmm.
it does give language that connotates like, come with us on this journey, and
Right.
not just, don't just throw money at this thing, but we want you for the long haul, especially if you're giving out free coffee. So
Yeah, there you go.
I think that's a great strategy. So after year end giving, how do you follow up? What's your post engagement strategy to keep people involved throughout the year?
It's a great question. So usually what we do is that, so again, our year-end giving campaign is usually that we send out a mailer. Sometimes I've hired some people to do phone calls for us, for people, for donors that haven't given in like 2 to 3 years, things like that. But for the most part, we send out a mailer every year, and we get, a large chunk of our donate. We get, I think, 3 to 4 times what we get in December than we get any other month. And so it's so essentially December for me is all end of year. Like, I'm not doing anything else. And what ideally you're sending out or getting a thank you to somebody within 2 to 3 days of when they've given. That's hard to do when a ton of people are giving and I'm a one-man team. So I also have to give grace to myself and realize that if it's been a week, no one's gonna never give to me again. But ideally, like, best practices is to like 2 to 3 days. And so what we usually do is we kind of segment our donors. And so for us, if you're giving like $50 or less, and you got to think about how big your organization is, and what this, you might want to write thank you notes to everybody if you're at a very small like stage and you're not having a ton of donors, or if you're a much bigger organization and you just don't have capacity for that. So you kind of have to think about your capacity in your team. But for us, if you're giving like, I think last year we said like, no, I think it was $100. If you're giving less than $100, I love just trying to get any emotion, like connection point with anybody I can. So I would try to just like send those people an email, just like a personal thank you for giving, like, and I just kind of had a typical thing I said every time, so it wasn't a ton of work. But then $100 and above, I would write a personal thank you card and I would put that in the mail if we had their address. If we don't have their address, I'll send a card. And then what I think is really key, and you want to think about like what you would consider a major gift. We consider like $1,000 and above a major gift. And so we're making a phone call to every single person who's given $1,000 and above, to thank them for their donation and to make it an invite, like a next step to carry on the relationship. Because if you give thank yous but you don't utilize the opportunity to continue the relationship, you've kind of wasted a thank you. So, like, especially for those larger donors, what I'll do is I'll give them a phone call. I'll say thank you. If they're local, most of our donors are local. um, I will invite them to come for a tour of our community center.
Hmm.
And so something like that along those lines. If I can tell kind of from the conversation that they're, busy people or something like that, or if that's not something that interests them, I'll just ask them, hey, I'd love to stay in touch. And a key question is to like let them tell you what they like. And so I'll say something along the lines of like, we're a Christian organization, so we use, flowery Christian language. So I'll say like what kind of like what kind of well, now I can't think of the question, but I think like what would bless you in our connection with you? So like, would that be reaching out to you to grab coffee like once or twice a year? Are you or do you just like, would you want a phone call from us every so often? Or are you like, I just want to be on our newsletter and that's fine?
Yeah.
Um, like what would bless you? And then now they have the opportunity to tell me about, what those connection points are. And then I'll make sure to, especially on those $1,000 and above, record that for each person and kind of funnel them into next year's plan of how I interact with them. But that's usually the bigger ones. And so each organization should really consider what they consider like a major donor. Because again, if you're smaller, maybe like 500 and above is a major donor for you. So maybe that's who you're doing that for.
That's really great. And it just encompasses why it's so important to build relationships and maintain relationships. Because when we think about giving and donation, sometimes we get caught up in the mindset of money, money, money. I have to reach
Right.
this goal. And people aren't dollar signs. They're not, and they give out of a place of partnership, like you mentioned
Absolutely.
before. So I really appreciate your insight, and it kind of confirms the information that we're sharing in this webinar.
Awesome.
Just about telling good stories, building
Mhm.
relationships, and taking the emphasis off of this rushed mentality of
Absolutely.
raising this
And
money.
donors don't like that either. Like donors don't want to feel like stressed when they see like,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, that's
Um,
pretty good.
Absolutely. And I'd say too, I think one of the biggest things, it sounds cheesy and silly, but it's so true, is like you just need to like learn to love your donors. And if you're like making decisions out of like, hey, I like love these people, I want them to be a part of this partnership. Like this, I know that what we're doing will be a blessing to them too. And like this isn't just to get their resources. This is good for our donors. Like it's good for our donors to be connected to migrant families in Alexandria. Like for how disconnected the world is right now, if they're supporting and being a partnership with us, that's good for them. And so if you just remember to like, I want to love my donors and I want to make decisions and I want to like send out stories and campaign information that's both like elevating the dignity of what we do or who we serve, but also like elevating the dignity of our donors too, and not just treating them like ATMs or banks that we just get withdrawals from, but are actual like people that we are also building relationships with. That's actually like I think it leads to a much more freeing way to do development. And it's the only reason why I can say I enjoy my job. Because I think if I did it the other way with just money, 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 I don't think I'd be in it anymore because I think I would have burnt out by now. So
Yeah, that's great advice. And here's a last final question. When you
sure.
think about relationships and just the whole personalization piece, how do
Right.
you then turn that into data that you evaluate?
When it comes to data, you want to make it as quantitative as you can, but also recognize that as you're doing relational work, it's never going to be fully quantitative. Like you kind of do have to make decisions out of, we've gathered as much data as we can, we're looking at it, and this is kind of our gut instinct off of the data. It's like data just helps you make better gut instincts. I'd say that's my opinion. I think anybody who says this is gonna, if you get all this data on your donors, then you can definitely raise this much next year, is just probably fooling you a bit. It's
And that's
just
sort of an alternative way to think about it, because we're always thinking data, 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 money, money, money. But to kind of put data like a little lower in relationships.
yeah,
So it's like if you're feeling good about the relationships, if you know that you have these donors, I love the even this little data marker, like I haven't talked to this donor in 9
yeah,
months. So I
Yeah.
want to talk to them again.
Great.
I appreciate that approach more so than we need to raise $500. And I love that you said it. That's the piece that helps you to enjoy what you do
Hmm.
and to really, instead of looking at year-end giving as a stressful time to make your budget, it's this opportunity to engage more with your
Oh,
community.
absolutely. I'm very excited to connect with a lot of my more major donors that I haven't talked to in a little bit. Some of them are expecting me to call, and like I'm excited for that conversation. It's not worrisome or intimidating. It's like these are relationships. Like I really love these people, and so it is an exciting opportunity. And yeah, and I think that's a good way you phrase it. If data is so important and really helps you make informed decisions, but if you are elevating it above the relationship, I do think that you've gone too far, because honestly, donors are people, and
Yeah.
people will surprise you, and
Mm,
people will do things unexpectedly, and sometimes they'll go a year without giving, even though all your data said they were going to give, and that's what they always give consistently at this time, because a family issue came up and they just couldn't do it that year. And then sometimes they got a bonus at work and they love you a lot, and then the giving was twice as much as you expected, and you can't actually predict. If you're using data to predict things, you're just completely off, because it'll
yeah.
never be what you predict. But I do think you're right. It's helpful to, I think a lot of what I do is I look at my end of year campaign, and then I do create this, like, for the next year, like kind of a guide map of what I want my relationships to look like over the next year. So I'll pull out all of our data on, again, what we would consider a major donor. And I would like say, okay, a lot of these people were in here. But also, if you're just looking at that data, and this is maybe a lot more work, but if you're just looking at the money you got, you might be missing some people who are willing to give a lot more. They just don't have a relational touch point with you. So if you're rigid about that, if you're like, well, you only gave $300, so you're going to fit into my medium donors category, and I'm only going to like send you newsletters.
Mm,
If you're rigid about that, well, maybe they give you $300 because they have no idea who you are, and they just saw a picture that compelled them, and they just gave. But maybe they regularly give $20,000 to organizations they care about, and you're completely missing an opportunity. So, to the best of my ability, I look at donors who fit our major donor category, and I kind of put them into the system for next year, like of when I'm going to contact them, like essentially creating a portfolio of people who, okay, in September I'm going to make sure I send them an email, and whatever it is, according, a lot of this is according to the relationship and kind of tailored plans according to each donor. But then also, if I get a lot of like new donors that I haven't seen before, I'll just research them a little bit. I'll type their names into Google. I'll see if there's anything there, because sometimes there's actually maybe more information than people are comfortable with online. And there's actually, for those who are really generous, you can actually see not necessarily the amounts they give, but you can see where a lot more generous donors are already giving. And if their giving is showing up online and they've only given you like $300, you should put them in your major donors category, even if they're not, giving you at that amount, because there's a capacity for, if you build relationship, to see that go
yeah.
up a lot more. So I think I'm trying to kind of get at your data thing. I don't know if I'm quite doing it, but
No, that's really good. It's so key, and I think this is the takeaway, that you have relational touch points.
yeah,
I think that's
absolutely.
the data that we need to emphasize, is these
Yes,
relational touch points with people. And then it's like, not only do you get the benefit of increased donations, but you get this community of people who
that's
can
it.
support you in so many other ways.
That's
So
it. And
yeah.
it's longevity. Even if relationships is intimidating to you, and it's like not the way you want, like, just think about it in the efficiency of it. It's about longevity. Like, we have donors who have been with us for 15 years and are never leaving us. And every time there's a challenge, or every time we need to do like a capital campaign for our new community center or something, they're the first to like line up and be like, "Ooh, let me give," you know, they're so excited. And and the relation, and it's like the longer you do the relationships, the easier it gets. I just think of one donor that he moved overseas, like he's not even local anymore, and he still gives so generously. And every time he's in the US, we just hang out. Like he just
Yeah.
invites, we just get lunch, and I give some updates, but there's no feeling of like, oh, I need to make sure I tell him blah blah blah, like I do with some other donors, because it's just like he's bought in. Like we're just hanging out and we come and he knows people and we're just like, and it's just this beautiful time of where I can update not just about Casa, but also some of my own life. And I get to hear about his life and what's going on. And then, you know, at the end, I'll share some like really exciting stories of what's been going on. And he'll just be like, of course, that's what's happening. I love Casa, you know, and it's just like joyful. And I get to be like, wow, my job was just like hanging out with a friend today. Like that was pretty fun, you know? And so
Yeah.
the longer you build those relationships, the more entrenched they'll be in your organization, and the more just like effortless it will be. And you'll kind of always still have these like parts of your budget that you're trying to raise every year, but that's what allows you to go in and realize like each year I'm not actually starting at zero. We know that money's coming in through just the relationships we have and through the things we've been doing for a long time.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think you unlocked the secret for a lot of nonprofit organizations. So I really appreciate you being on today and being a part of this conversation. And we can see why you raise so much money and you're so good at what you do. So
I appreciate it.
Much.
Awesome.